Hi, this is Big Table author Mark Saba. I'll be reading a story from my collection, Ghost Tracks, Stories of Pittsburgh Past. This story takes place in 1979. It's called The Magnolia Branch. It happened one April night when the magnolia tree was blooming. The tree was pink and white, lighted by the moon and a street lamp. It grew in front of an old stone house halfway between the universities, across the street from another stone house, which was labeled Historic Landmark. Inside both homes, husbands snored their wives to sleep. It had been 6 months since the two of them had met. Neither of them could remember the actual day or time of the meeting, or even where they had been or why they had been together. He simply called her now, safe in his private room down the hall from his loud roommates, 6 months from the last time he had seen her. As he dialed her number, he thought of how she would respond. "You wouldn't believe the work they give you at this school. You should come up and see my work sometime. Tonight? I just can't. Well, I don't know. I just can't." "Hello? Jean? It's me. Luke." Her voice lightened. "How are you, Mr. Sarda?" "Great. Hey, you busy tonight? There's a party over at the house." "Luke, you should see what I have to do here. What are you doing?" "Now? Drawing. I just figured I'd stay up and draw tonight." "Come on. I'll be over in a half hour." She paused. He had already decided she wouldn't go. "Okay. Good. See you then." He hadn't seen her in 6 months, maybe longer, since before Christmas. It always happened like this, though, always when they'd least expect it. One of them would call, and it would be as if they spoke to each other every day. He wondered how she kept her hair now that she had transferred to the architecture school at the other university. He knew they dressed differently there. He had known she would fit right in. He felt a little anxious, but knew he shouldn't, because he knew that once they met, their anxiety would be gone. It always happened this way. He remembered one of their meetings, one when they had been in high school, when they lived at opposite ends of the city and saw each other twice a year. He remembered the time he walked up the steps leading to the front porch of her house. It must have been summer, though he couldn't remember what month. It might have been August, because the leaves were all lost in steam around the convent across from her house. They walked through the hillside convent grounds that evening and felt the skin around their eyes become moist. He remembered this night well now, as he stood before the mirror in his bedroom and looked for a shirt to wear. Their lives were lives of days. For her, the days were so filled she could hardly ever keep track of engagements. He knew this because he felt he was sometimes the same way. For the 6 or 7 times she would forget to call him back, there would be one when she would remember. On these days, the days that could only be filled by him, they would meet somewhere and spend the hours together. These days, 2 or 3 a year, accumulated in each of them so that they felt themselves living different lives those days. They felt somehow better, somehow released from their normal lives on those days. For all the times they called one another, and he called more often than she, only a handful would result in their meeting. When such a day as today came, they would be busy with their separate lives until they met. Even when they met, it was not shocking. They would look at each other and decide where to go, what to do. Then, by the end of the day, after they had separated again, they would both realize how strong and peaceful it had felt, as if they had not been together at all, but only with themselves. He looked into the mirror again and thought about the last time they had been together. He could not remember it exactly. He remembered many days they had spent together. Fragments of these days came up as he thought, but dates he could not remember. He wore a light jacket. It was actually cool that evening, but his fingertips were warm and even a little numb. He had exercised and gone to classes that day. He wasn't tired at all. He had almost filled the day. Now he realized the day was beginning all over again. He walked through the level oak-lined streets, Old homes lined the streets, homes with front yards planted in evergreens and rhododendrons. He came to the other campus after a 20-minute walk. She was ready as soon as he'd knocked. He couldn't believe it. Her hair was loose, unstyled. She wore a large shirt with the tails out over her pants. They walked back along main streets to the house where his friends had their regular Saturday night party. They remembered her at the party. He watched his friends' faces, their reactions to seeing her again. She was very attractive. Some of them put their arms around her and smiled. Others stopped while walking past and said, "Jean." Then they would have little to say. It happened over and over again that night. They all loved seeing her again, and they were glad for him because he always spoke of her and they thought he loved her. She enjoyed laughing with them again. He stood near her and sometimes smiled. At the other parties, he would be running up and down the stairs. He would be the one putting his arms around friends and laughing. They both decided to leave after an hour. Back at his apartment, she was amused by a small cat a friend had given him. She sat on the floor, leaning against the bottom of the torn couch. He decided he liked the way she kept her hair now. It just fell from her head all around, a little shaggy, but shiny like washed nylon rope. It was light brown. They stayed there until 3 o'clock, leaning against the couch while the black and white cat stalked their hands. She had to be up early the next morning, 7 o'clock. But she said, "Luke." "What?" She looked down again and then up. "Could I stay tonight?" Just as he was about to say yes, she spoke again. "Maybe I should just go home. You'll never be up in time if you stay." They both knew it wouldn't really matter because there would be other days like this one. When they were able to be together, it seemed as though they met every day, so they never felt the need to take advantage of time. "Come see my room," he said. It was a closet-sized room behind the kitchen. "Luke, it's so small." I know, but I like it." "I do too." She was a little taller than he, and he was glad she wouldn't spend the night, because it would have been embarrassing in that small room. The cat walked in and they felt suddenly crowded. He picked up their jackets and they left. It was a slow walk. All the parties along the main road were finished now. A few lights shone on the third floors of the buildings. It was April and still very cool in the middle of the night. Twice a cat passed them and they listened to it drone further. A car passed them and they listened to it drone further down the road. She said it was actually cold out. He helped her wrap a scarf around her neck. She held her hands deep in her pockets and looked at him with her nose covered by the scarf. Then she slipped her hand through his arm and held it close. They turned a corner onto a smaller road. Professors and other professionals lived on this road. There was hardly any wind. The moon was out, but they didn't look up at it. Its light combined with light from the street lamps. The road curved, and both saw splotches of street lamp light dotting the sidewalk, following the curve of the road. He stopped, and she looked at him. He was looking at the magnolia tree. "Look how bright the petals are," he said. He walked over to the tree. "Look," she whispered. She thought the yard was pretty and didn't want him spoiling it. He picked a twig with the flower on its end and brought it back. The flower wasn't all opened yet. He smelled it first and gave it to her. They began walking again, and she looked at the flower in her hand. Before they came to the end of the road where it intersected another main road, he thought of something to say. "Jean, if we never get married, at least we know we were married tonight." He didn't feel awkward saying this. He would never have said it during his real life, but life was different on those few days they spent together. They could say whatever came into their minds and not think about how the other would react, because it was as though they were speaking to themselves. She had been imagining the same thing. She broke off a bud, which grew at the bottom of the twig, and gave it to him. "Here, this is your boutonniere." He liked the idea and put it through a buttonhole in his collar. "You know," he said, "did you ever think that someday when you want to get married, you'll plan it for a certain day, and that day will come, but you might just not feel like getting married that day? She smiled and nodded. That would be horrible. Why should you do something if you don't feel like it? Just think of all the things you'd have to do, the church, reception, and people taking pictures. And if you didn't feel like being there that particular day, it would be awful. I guess I never thought about it that way, she said. He had said too much. They walked the rest of the way in silence. When they arrived at her building, they stood by the front door for a while. A cat jumped out at them and went up to the door, so they let it in. She'd never seen it before. They both watched it inside the building now and laughed. Then he picked it up to carry it out again. He was ready to leave. Thank you, Mr. Sarda, she said. You're welcome. She kissed him. Don't forget about the show. What show? My show, the class, I mean. Oh, okay. He knew he would never see it. They always made plans like this. They made 20 plans, and only one would be followed through. He kissed her again and left with the cat. Outside, he let the cat go and walked home the same route they had walked. He passed the magnolia tree again and stopped to watch its pink and white brightness before going on. At his apartment, he took a whiskey glass and filled it part way with water. Then he set the magnolia bud into it and put it on his dresser in his small bedroom. The next morning, the bud had opened fully. He looked at it, but could not remember exactly what it had meant. He would try calling her again in a few weeks. He never got in touch with her during the summer. In the fall, he transferred to another school outside the state. One day he opened his mailbox and found a letter from her. He read the letter and found that she was getting married to someone he had never heard her speak of before. He went back to his room to sit and think a while. Then he wrote her back to wish her good luck. He wrote as if they spoke to each other every day, and he dropped the letter into the mailbox on his way to class. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.